Well, thank you all for coming, ladies and gentlemen. I feel a bit out of place with all these dedicated husbandrists. I'm just an amateur. But if I'm boring you, Richard, feel free to slip away. I always say that to my students. Don't stay and suffer. I hope you can hear me. I'm a little bit deaf, by the way. When I was young, I ran a mobile discotheque in Nairobi. I did hear all the good bands. I saw Slade once. I was deaf for 3 days after. So, anyway, if you say something I can't hear you, shout it at me. I'm 66. I spent 39 years of my life in Africa. And I'm going to be sort of talking about various things I've come across. A bit of husbandry, a bit about snakebite, some random stories. I was brought up in Kenya, subsequently worked in Ghana, West Africa, in Egypt, Botswana, and then finally 12 years in Ethiopia. I've just realised in this talk there are, I think, 7 or more pictures of me, which tells you all you need to know about my ego. Anyway, let's get cracking. Government health warning. It's a sign on a road in Kenya. It was actually warning the drivers about rumble strips, but the artist didn't spell rumbles correctly. But that's what I was to say to my students. I ramble a bit. When I was 4 years old, my father went to work in Kenya for the colonial government as a teacher, and my parents went to a little town called Manor, which is on the northeast side of Mount Kenya. And they went there with 4 children under 5 to a town without electricity in an area where the Mau Mau rebellion had really not finished. It was still a state of emergency with the odd freedom fighter in the forest with a gun. And when I said to my father years later, I said, "You were very brave to go out to Africa. It was the making of us, you know." He said, "We'd have done anything to get away from your grandmother." It was an exciting place to live. I mean, one night we got some chickens for Christmas, and there was a hell of a racket outside, and my mother said to my father, "Harry, go out, there's something among the chickens." And he came back looking a bit worried and said, "It's a leopard, I've left it to it." We had a soldier billeted with us, very hard man. This is to do with the Mau Mau. Paddy, his name was. And he went drinking in town. My father said to him, "Paddy, when you come back at night, you realise it's totally dark." He said, "Sure, Mr. Spawls, there's no problem at all." Anyway, he arrived back at sort of 1 in the morning, shouting into the house in the darkness, "Harry," he said, "get the hell out of here, there's a bloody elephant on the road." My father said, "You know, Paddy, you've seen the elephant on the bottle, you know, the Tusker bear, get to bed." Anyway, my father got me up in the morning, we went out to the road, tracks of the elephant were down the road. They did migrate off the mountains, going down into the dry country. I think if you're young, you're surrounded by these things. I always admire husbandrists in this country because the stuff isn't easily available. I collected a lot of stuff. I've kept most things, but there are things that I collected locally that I kept myself, and the big advantage of that is, apart from the fact it's almost free, if it doesn't do too well and it doesn't feed or it doesn't seem to be mating, you can just pop it back. In the wild, I started off with collecting Jackson's chameleons, which were common around Meru, and through that I got in contact with a guy who probably not many people will know now, but he was prominent at one time, Jonathan Leakey, famous reptile dealer. That's him there. This is him with also quite famous vet, John Cooper, in his young days. And that's Jonathan looking a bit older with me. He still lives at Lake Baringo, he's still alive. But he encouraged me, and these things matter when you're young. We then went to live in Nairobi, and I got involved with the personnel at the Nairobi Snake Park. Again, some of these characters, some of you might have heard of. That's CJP Ionides, Snake Man, lived in Tanzania, Tanganyika, collected a lot of interesting snakes. Peter Nares, one of Jonathan Leakey's collecting team, taught me how to sort of capture and handle snakes. He was the guy that said to me, never bring your hand near a venomous snake until you've secured the head. And on the left there, again, charismatic man who died relatively recently, James Ash, ran the Nairobi Snake Park, and then set up an institute on the coast, BioChen, which is still going. They do good work with snakebite. And this cobra down here on the right is the, it was regarded as a black-necked spitting cobra, but it was renamed by Wolfgang Worcester, and Don Broadley, they called it Niger Ashii in honour of James. James Ash's spitting cobras. In those days, you know, I helped at the snake park a lot. We did things that nowadays you'd never be allowed to. We went out to collect problem snakes, we cleaned pits, we handled stuff, we moved stuff around. And the park wasn't terribly well designed. We were learning in those days. That's the present curator of herpetology in the National Museum in Nairobi, Patrick Malonze. He's a genuine enthusiast, doing a lot of good taxonomic work. This is one of the cages we had, and those are a couple of king cobras that I always caught in Thailand. The idea of this cage was that the snakes couldn't get out. You had the disadvantage that you couldn't get in. So we had a sort of wooden ladder. You can see it sticking up there outside. If you wanted to get in with the cobras, you put the wooden ladder down, climb down into the cage. It was just a design fault. Many of the cages did not have glass panels in the doors, which is something you want if you're approaching, you know, if you're about to open a cage with venomous snakes inside, especially big, quick snakes like the Gold's tree cobra. That's a snake that will make a determined attempt to escape when you open the door. They're almost cunning in a way. And, you know, you want to know if it's near the door before you open it, but the cage design, they did not have glass panels in the doors. Keeping venomous snakes has progressed a bit these days. We weren't brilliant husbandrists. And that's the Kenyan montane viper, Montathris. Lives on top of the Aberdares mountain range and Mount Kenya up there in the moorland. They're active by day because at night it freezes. We never had much success keeping them. I mean, this is what the Aberdares are like at dawn. In the day, it's like what they say, like the Sahara by day and the Arctic by night. This is Alex Duff-Mackay, who was the curator of herpetology at the museum. He tried keeping these things without success. Several of us tried. You could never get them to feed. And then Mackay discovered, he was living at quite high altitude, that if you put them outside, he just had them in an oil drum with a few plants. And he discovered that provided they get reasonably cold at night, they'll feed during the day. But they had to get cold. Down in Nairobi it was relatively warm. But the man was a bit of a useless husbandrist. I once caught one of these beautiful little snakes, Kenyan horned viper, and I gave it to Mackay. He was keen to keep it, he had it at home. I dropped by a few weeks later, I said, "How's the viper?" He said, "Oh, it seems all right." I put a mouse in there the other day. I opened the cage, the mouse was eating the snake. You know, some people have very strong feelings about feeding, giving live food, but in those days we used to catch them in live traps, put the things in there. I think collecting snakes in Africa is a sort of rite of passage, especially sort of young white guys. And I collected a few of these. I had a few bites, all as a result of carelessness. The first one was from a papa, which was in fact the worst. I lost a finger on the other hand. They got a tissue-destroying venom. Not a good snake to be bitten by. And we went after black mammoths as well. That's exciting. They live up in trees. You need your ground stick. They're very fond of living in these beehives. The local honey hunters, they used to go around with these guys looking for black mammoths, and the honey hunters hang beehives in the trees. And if you went with these guys, they would know. They would say, "Yeah, there's a mammoth in this hive, and there's bees in this one, and a monitor lizard in this." But getting up in the tree and sort of opening the beehive when there's a mamba inside can be fairly exciting. Touch wood. Not big bar. Not yet. When I've done my A-levels, I didn't feel like studying any further, and I went up to work in northern Kenya, and I actually found myself teaching in a secondary school right on the border of Kenya, Ethiopia and Somalia, a place called Mandera. Here I am with my students collecting snakes, lizards and geckos and stuff. And I remember once, I'm going to mention in this talk some of the things we sort of inflict on our children, you know. One of these lads, I asked him what he was going to do when he left school. He looked a little worried, and he said, I have to go across to Somalia, to an Al-Ham waterhole. And he said, I have to kill someone there. And I said to him, why do you want to kill someone? He said, it's a blood feud with our family. I'm just expected to do this. And I thought, you know, that's a hell of a thing to project on your children. Well, the Somalis are rather, you know, they jokingly say that the Ethiopians are the English of Africa. They're terribly insular. And the Somalis are the Scottish of Africa. It's all feuds and nothing forgotten. Anyway, so, you know, when I graduated, I spent a couple of years as a British volunteer in Ghana. Having joined VSO, the British Volunteer Programme, I confidently expected to be sent to Kenya. My degree is actually in geology. I thought I'm going to find myself teaching, working as a geologist in Kenya. And I find myself teaching physics in Ghana. It's a fascinating country. That's Barry Hughes, by the way. Again, something you may or may not know of him. He's done a lot of work. He taught at the University of Ghana for a number of years. Did a lot of interesting research. You've got the Gaboon viper there. If I talk a little bit about Gaboon viper, as you know, it was regarded as a single species, Bitis gabonica. But in fact, there are two colour phases, two slightly different. These are the ones from the east of the Dahomey Gap, the forest over here. We've had to go much further south, and that's now known as Bitis gabonica. The ones to the west of the Dahomey Gap. The Dahomey Gap is where savannah comes to the sea over there in West Africa. And of course, gaboons by and large are not in savannah. They may be in savannah mosaic. The ones to the west are now known as a separate species, Bitis rhinoceros. And you can see the difference. These guys have got this big triangle behind the eye. This one's got a narrow one. And also the ones from the west have got horns. They're a sedentary snake. I've never managed to catch one. Keen to find one, been in places looking for them, but they don't move around very much. And then there was a guy called Jonathan Warner studying them in South Africa with radio tractors. He found one of them remained motionless for 87 days. It didn't move at all. That's a snake that's probably fairly happy in a small vivarium. But Harry Green, there's that very fine herpetologist, Harry Green, American, radio tracked bushmaster in Costa Rica. It sat still for 67 days. Actually, I think at one point it tilted its head and drank some rainwater. But that's it. So you can say, well, okay, as far as a gaboon's concerned, most of the time, enrichment probably just consists of making sure it's got the right temperature and it gets the right things to eat. But you've read about these surveys of king cobras. King cobra, I read the other day, went 14 kilometres in search of a female, 3.7 kilometres in a day. You struggle to find a vivarium that will keep king cobra happy. Well, you've got to keep them, otherwise nobody ever sees a live one, very few of us. Handling big vipers is always a vexed question. I mean, I learned how to catch snakes. I wasn't initially that much of a keeper. You've got the snake under control. But nowadays we tend to use hooks rather than grabs. There's a guy here called Dave Morgan up there, and this is Gerald Hardner. They ran a very nice reptile research centre, a place called Manuletti in South Africa. In fact, it was actually one of the independent homelands, as they were called. And when the homelands were abolished, the funding for the reptile centre ended. But they had a nice experiment going there. They had 7 or 8 kits with gaboons from different areas of Africa, and they were looking at the where they could get them to breed, what conditions they liked, etc., etc. Trying a bit of crossbreeding and stuff like that. And Dave told me an interesting story. He said one day one of the gaboons, they were manoeuvring it and it fell. And they thought we'd better X-ray it just to check it. And the snake had been with them for some time. They found it had multiple broken ribs, but they were old. They were mostly healed. And Dave had a sudden thought. He said, when we put these things on the hooks, are we breaking their ribs? And so he checked his gaboons. And all the ones he'd had for a while that had been handled quite a lot, they all had broken ribs. When you think about the logic of it, gaboons don't climb, not like Nasocornis rhinohorns, which will climb. They'll go 3-4 metres up a tree. These guys don't climb. The pressure, when you put one of those snakes on a hook, unless it's a very broad hook, the pressure, the sort of number of pressure is force per unit area, the pressure is going to be high. They don't ever do that in life. They're not designed to basically cope with being picked up. Now, coming back to Ghana, up in the north where I was, a lot of people died from snake bite. There were 2 hospitals, one had serum, people usually recovered. It was a mission hospital, got serum from the United States, or via the United States. The other one was a government hospital, they didn't have serum, people died. And the snake that bit them most often, West African carpet viper, Echis ocellatus. They were common in my area. In fact, the most common snake, I caught about 500 snakes in 2 years, and nearly 100 were these West African carpet vipers. I went to the local hospital. I thought I'll have a look at the epidemiology of bites. What I found was really interesting. There were 2 peaks in the timing of bites. Around March, April, when everybody's working in the fields, start of the rainy season, everybody got bitten. Men got bitten, women got bitten, children got bitten, the elderly got bitten, in all sorts of funny places. They grow yams, they'd sit on the ground to make the yam mound. People bitten in the backside, people were bitten in the hand, people were bitten on the foot. But then, around November, December time, there was another peak of bites. That's the time they call the harmattan. Cold wind blows from the north in West Africa, it's dry. Quite a weird time. Things like hemethicanics come out to prowl around in the cold. But the peak of bites in November, December time were all young boys, all bitten on the right hand. And I thought, where's this coming from? And one of my colleagues, I spent a few days at his village here and there, we went out once on a bushmeat hunt. These bushmeat hunts are exciting. What happens is, a bunch of guys on the other side of the valley set fire to the bush when the wind is going the right way. You're out there in front of the fire, and things are driven by the fire. You're waiting there to kill them. Some of them more, sophisticated hunters have got a net here and there. Some of them have homemade guns. And believe me, if the man next to you's got his old shotgun and an antelope's coming towards you and he starts to swivel with a shotgun, you look sharp. Anyway, when the fire had gone through and they caught and killed and grabbed everything, we then went across the burnt out land. And it just made my blood freeze, because the small boys were told to put their hands down a hole where the fire had gone through, hoping to find something they could eat, like a giant rat or royal python. And sometimes it'd be a carpet viper. And this is, again, one of the rites of passage that they put their kids through in northern Ghana. And this little lad here used to collect snakes for me. He was always out in the bush, and quite often when I'd be teaching, I'd look out the window and I'd see him squatting patiently under a tree nearby, and I knew that somewhere in the bush a snake was being watched for me. And I once said to him, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" He said, "I just want to get to 12, so I can stop having to put my hand down the hole." Spent a year in Egypt, and we did some night driving there. I like going out at night with a vehicle looking for snakes. It's fun. And they get the time right. It was pioneered by Lawrence Calver in the southwestern United States. You go out at night, might find a snake crossing the road, sometimes basking on the road, a gecko or something like that. There's that kick. You know it if you've done night cruising. Suddenly the snake's on the road in front of you. This is a little lighter inches diadem, a ball-headed snake. You get them in dune areas, up around Ismailia and places like that. In Egypt we used to find them. Once in a while you get a Cerastes, on viper. And in Egypt we used to get paid. They weren't keen on bank accounts, they got paid in cash. Used to take home huge bags of cash. I kept them in a cage with my big Cerastes. Not that it was much risk, because Egypt's a very honest country. But this little guy here, that's Cerastes, the horned viper. This is Cerastes vipera, sand viper. And you can see that little individual's got a rather bloody head. There's a story behind that. Out one night, I was out with my wife, we were road cruising. We saw this snake on the road, and I got out, and I saw the blood on the head. It was upside down. I thought, oh, damn it. Never caught one. Here's a dead one. And I picked it up, went into the, opened the door of the car, and said to my wife, look, the snake's been run over. And I dropped it into a tin. Bloody snake sprung right out the tin. I swear my wife left the car through the window while shouting at me. We had a few exciting adventures in Egypt. It's a country that's been through war, you know. One night in the Fayoum, which is a desert, it's a lake down southwest of Cairo. We were road cruising one night, and there was an Egyptian cobra on the road. And I stopped the car, and I got off, and it slid down. It's a very area, a lot of canals and flooded areas, and it slid into some sort of waterside vegetation. And my wife said to me, you're not going down there. So I was shining the torch around, and a taxi stopped. And out of this taxi got about 14 Egyptians. And they were suspicious. I think they must have thought I was an Israeli spy or something. One of them came up to me in rather aggressive fashion and said, what are you doing? So I'm looking for snakes. And of course all the other passengers joined in. They said words to the effect, that's a likely story, you know, you're having us on, you know. And one said, we want to know what you're really doing. And I said, there was a snake on the road. And this guy said, there's no snakes here. And I shone the torch down, and at that minute, purely fortuitously, the Egyptian cobra made a reappearance and suddenly shot out the bush. And at that moment, I saw 15 Egyptians trying to jump into a taxi simultaneously while the driver tried to drive away. It scared the hell out of me. But it was a fortunate moment, otherwise I could have found myself in the jail explaining why I was prowling around the Fayoum at night. And there was an occasion we went up into the Sinai. There's been considerable fighting up there. We went down to a beach and found a skull, human skull. And then my wife suddenly said, what's that under the bush here? And I thought it was a tortoise, Kleinman's tortoise. Went to pick it up. It was a hand grenade. And then my wife said to me, in that terrible tone, she said, do you think there are landmines here? So we tiptoed off the beach. We walked very carefully in our footsteps, leaving the beach. Anyway, drove up into the Sinai. I was a guy called Dave Brownlee. He's a keen snake keeper, lives up in Newcastle. And then we found this beautiful snake, Echis coloratus, Burton's carpet viper. Following morning, we drove up. We came across a place where there was a wadi, dry river valley, and the camels were grazing there. And I said to my wife, you know, Dave and I are going to go look for snakes here. And she said, don't you dare to make me landmines. And I said, there won't be any landmines here. You see, the camels, the bedroom would not let their camels graze there if there were landmines. It's safe, I swear. So while my wife sat in the car and fretted, we got out and turned over the rocks and looked under bushes and poked around and dug out holes. We then drove on up the road to a little sort of military post, and the soldiers up there said, oh, stop and have some tea. They were sitting there waiting in case the Israelis came, you know, they had sort of fixed frequency radio. And I said to these guys, are there any landmines in this area? And they said, oh yeah, sometimes the camels get blown up. So I got the landmine jitters off. It's one of the things that puts me off going to Mozambique or Angola, because in those countries mines were sort of sowed rather heedlessly. Spent a few years in Botswana. That is a marvellous, marvellous country. It's worth visiting if you want sort of wildness. It hasn't got the variety of sort of natural habitat that Kenya has, but still a remarkable country. And we went down once into the Kalahari camp down there. It was -7 degrees at night. But mind you, we did a little road driving there after dark, and at almost zero, these geckos were out. This is Colopus wolbergii. And they were active at near zero temperatures. I get the feeling that they're down in a deep burrow and it's relatively warm, and they shuffle out, move around a bit, and then go back. But in the morning, one of these little guys came to visit us. These are the people that used to be called the Bushmen, or the Basawa, or the San. And they live in the wild places. And these guys, when it's cold at night, they basically just dig a hole and get in there with a skin and some dogs, keeps them warm. These people that live in the remote bush, they're the people that in Africa are at risk. I'm putting my snakebite hat on now. From snakebite, people live in remote places. And a number of years ago, a guy called Bill Branch and I wrote a book called Dangerous Snakes of Africa. It's just being revised now. I'm due to turn the manuscript in fairly soon. That's Bill, by the way. I don't know, some of you might have known him. Next to him there is Joe Berarducci. Exports a lot of reptiles from Tanzania. Charles Musia, top Tanzanian herpetologist. And Bill and I, we've had a lot of fights, particularly over that book, but over some other ones as well. I said to Bill, do you want to feel like redoing the book? Johan Moray, who's a South African snakeman, suggested we do it. Bill said, yep, let's do it. So we started work, and I got a letter from Bill saying I'm having some mobility issues. Looks like I may have motor neuron disease. Poor man died in a year. So it's a tremendous loss to herpetology. So I'm finishing it myself. Anyway, this is down in the Omo Valley in Ethiopia. People there live partial lives. The sort of life our ancestors lived. We don't live it any longer, where you really are at risk from other people with guns, weapons anyway, elephants, crocodiles, lions, snakes, insects. And these are the sort of things, one of the ways you say you could solve snakebite in Africa is if people could sleep in a closed house. But an awful lot of people, there's no way of closing their houses. This is the sort of huts they live in. They're made of brushwood. You go in there at night with a scorpion torch, you can see 6 or 7 little scorpions all scattered around. It's a hard, harsh life. I asked about this structure here at the entrance to the village. What's it for? I thought it was a sort of, like a sort of welcome sign. That's where they sleep to try and get the hell away from the mosquitoes. You imagine sleeping out there with the kids. You might fall off. But, at least you get bitten a little less often. It's a hard life out there for many people. And, there is a way forward. There is a way forward, but it involves governments doing something concrete. In many countries in Africa, their governments have done stuff that's concrete. But Ethiopia, the country was racked by civil war for a long time. And these people in the south, many of them very proud, independent, they're not interested sometimes in the Western stuff. The government did actually build a nice school there. But when we were down there, I spoke with the school teacher. And he said that parents won't bring their kids. Because they say, what's the point of learning this stuff? Their business is to be able to handle a gun, to keep a lion away from the cows, to be able to build huts and stuff like that. They're not interested in what they can learn in school. Sitting on the floor of the forest, I'm sure you can all spot it. Can you see the puff out of there? It's there. That's the essence of animal camouflage. If you look carefully, you're going to find it. But if you don't, it's not there. and people tread on these things. And then you're into trouble. Tissue destruction. The nearest clinic might be 40 kilometres away, and the only way to get there is to walk. So, you go and see a local healer, fetish priest. They do a few harmless rituals, then after 3 or 4 days they see signs of systemic involvement. If they are, you've upset the gods. I can't do anything for you. Then they set off for the hospital. These are the things we're up against. However, there are other dangerous things as well. See the line? It's there. You've got to look carefully. Back in Botswana, the snouted cobra, this was regarded at one time as a subspecies of the Egyptian cobra. Now it's a Nullifera. The photo below was given to me by 1 hour back. Pictured up there. Interesting man. He deserted from the South African army, and they were fighting in Angola, taking refuge in Botswana. There was a price in his head. Coming back to the cobra, this particular snake was in the school. It had gone down a crack in the road. And students called me, said, sir, there's a snake. And I basically, in every school I've worked at, I said to the students, if you find a snake, don't kill it, come and call me, I'll pay for it. Works quite well, although in Ghana many times, in fact, I lost count of the number of times my students said to me, I'm so sorry, sir. They said, I saw a snake and my instinct was to belt it one. And then I suddenly thought, oh, Mr. Spawls wants it, he'll pay for it. It was too late. Instinct was to whack it. You know, in Africa, snake bite is a constant deadly hazard. You don't get away from it. People don't think, oh, that snake might be harmless. They just think it might kill me, it might kill my children. Get rid of it. Anyway, this snake was right down in the crack. And I thought, well, how am I going to get it out? We started digging. It was obviously weren't going to get it out that way. So I sat one of the lads up to the chemistry lab, where my wife was. Came out with a bottle of chloroform. We put a little chloroform in it. It worked quite well. The snake came out. It was amazing. It came zooming up out, reared up and fell over backwards. Stoned out of its mind. Now, having said that, I remember once talking to a guy in Egypt, a man called Tolba, who ran a business exporting reptiles. And he had some Waldrinsia, big black desert snake. And I said, how do you find these guys? I've never found them. I've driven many times at night to Cairo and Suez. And he said, oh, it's easy. You just find a crack where you think one might be living and squirt in some petrol. But he said they take a while sometimes to come out. And I thought, well, that probably doesn't do their lungs any good. And then a Dutch guy I knew who kept them said to me, they never do very well in captivity. And well, that's probably because they gassed with petrol before they were killed. Anyway, now, Ben mentioned earlier a crate attacks people at night. This is the Mozambique spitter. That is the only aggressive snake that I know of. Mozambique spitters were relatively common where I were. Difficult snake to catch, you've got to put your safety specs on before you go to tackle it. And they come into houses at night sometimes and bite people. And no one knows why. I mean, they'll come in, we say the general sort of consensus is dangerous snakes only ever bite in defence. And there's a lot of evidence that indicates they go to extraordinary lengths to avoid being forced to bite. Because any snake that closes with a human is likely to die. So basically, why do Mozambique spitters come into houses at night and bite people? We can only conclude, and Johan Murray, done a lot of good work in South Africa, was telling me that all you can conclude, he dealt with a lot of such bites, people bitten on the face, people bitten on the bottom, people bitten on an arm which they're hanging out of a bed, The Mozambique spitter cannot eat you. But, basically, they're coming in at night, something about human being must trigger a feeding response. And these bites are often very, very severe. You get a quick defensive bite from snakes. Quite often it's not that bad, and I know that. I've had 8 bites, and only 2 of them things go wrong. But these snakes are coming into the houses at night, bite people, cause severe problems, and no one knows why. But it's aggression. Our house in Botswana at school was right next to the girls' dormitory, and if I heard screams from the dormitory at night, I just invariably woke up, grabbed my head torch, grabbed my bag, grabbed my catch stick, grabbed my goggles, and went out there. 95% of the time there was a snake in the dormitory. But one night I went out, the girls were, after midnight, the girls were running everywhere. They were hysterical with fear. One of them ran into a barbed wire fence. She just gashed herself terribly. I said, what is going on? Where's the snake? It's not a snake, Mr. Spawls. It is a little man. I said, what do you mean by that? At the window there was a little man. And they have a belief in this spirit that looks like a small person. In South Africa they call it the Tokoloshi. You hear that name sometimes in Botswana as well. It's some sort of spirit, and they were, there was mass hysteria. People were hurt. One girl ran into a tree and sort of knocked herself out. Just because someone had seen this thing, said they'd seen this thing. So it wasn't always a spitting cobra in the dormitory. And then I spent a few years in Ethiopia, very, very cultured country. Unlike most of sub-Saharan Africa, tangible history going back for 2,000 years. You've got the Axum, the stele from the ancient Christian kingdom. Gondar Castle was built by an eccentric emperor 500 years ago. And Lalibela, this is one of the wonders of the world, churches carved out of the rock. Amazing, amazing country, and worth visiting. A lot of endemic birds, surprisingly few endemic snakes. There's a lot of forest in the southwest, but Ethiopia, 90% of land in Africa over 3,000 metres is in Ethiopia. It's a mountain kingdom. We've been pushed up under the Rift Valley, the African Rift Valley. There's a huge granite pluton rising. It's cracked apart, what they call the Ethiopian Dome. The forest there attracted rainfall, still does. The mountains attracted rainfall, created forests. But those forests came into being after the Central African forest had retreated. So in Ethiopia, although you've got genuine rainforest, you've got no black tree snakes, thrassops, you've got no atheris, bush vipers, you've got no gaboon vipers, you've got no rhinohorn vipers. What you have got, oddly, are savanna snakes colonising the forest. I've seen boomslangs, which are basically a savanna snake, elsewhere deep in the forest in Ethiopia. And you've got a little handful of endemics, including two rather unusual vipers. This is Vitis palmioxula, Ethiopian mountain viper. First one was found in 1967 by a German ornithologist. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Anyway, he found it dead on the road down there in the southwest. Took it to Wolfgang Burmer in Bonn, and they described it. For a long time, no one had ever seen a live one. And Peter Nekas, Czech guy who was actually really interested in chameleons, went to a forest in the southwest, and he managed to find this juvenile. Having spent a lot of time in the forest, they found it on the last day in the grounds of the brewery. Piece of luck. Anyway, I decided I would go and look for these guys. It was a bit disappointing. I went with a man called Colin Tilbury. Colin's a chameleon enthusiast. And there's Colin there. Went to the Barley Mountains where he found a new species of chameleon. Anyway, we went down into the southwest forest. If you hunted snakes in a big forest, I mean, it's heartbreaking. You spend day after day, you try it all. You put down a little drift fence, you drive at night, you get the local people to look for snakes for you. You rake through the leaf litter. You look and you look and you look. You don't find much. Anyway, Colin and I were working hard trying to find the mountain viper. Didn't find them until the last day, driving up the road at dusk. And they're on the road with two. Unfortunately, a passing villager had found them before us and beaten them both to death. So there were considerable tears beside the road on that occasion, I can tell you. Anyway, there's a few of them in circulation in the pet trade. They were brought to the world by Sisai Taye. Sisai was an Ethiopian guy, an entrepreneur. He used to work for a guy called Doug Muller in southern Africa, and they were exporting a lot of stuff from Mozambique, and in fact been caught in South Africa, taken across. And Sisai thought he'd try his luck in Ethiopia. Now, when I was working in Ethiopia, it was quite hard to get a permit to collect. And in fact, I actually got some help from a couple of professors at the university, but they said, we've got a moratorium on the export of any genetic material. So whatever you catch, if you don't release it, it must come to us. I said, that's just fine. Now, Sisai wanted to make money. He went down to the southwest. He found that the coffee farmers were finding these snakes, particularly when they cleared the undergrowth. In Ethiopia, coffee is not grown like a sort of formal crop the way it is in Kenya. It's grown as understory in the forest. And when you look at a coffee plantation in Ethiopia, it's a wonderful place because it's producing a crop, and yet it's natural forest. And the farmers were finding these snakes, and Sisai got them to basically collect them for him. He said to me he never saw a live one himself, or wild one like that. But he got a fair number, and he took them up to the wildlife department and said, I'd like to export them. And they said, no, you are not allowed to export anything. But somebody tipped him off that he might have better luck with the Department of Agriculture. So he went to the Department of Agriculture and said, I want to export some snakes. And they said, oh yeah, livestock, we'll give you a permit. And they did. And Sisai told me all he had to make sure was when on the day he went to the airport to export them, that the wildlife guy wasn't there, but the guy from the Ministry of Agriculture was. So they were exported as livestock, and they reached the West legally. When the classic paper on the snakes of Ethiopia was done by two researchers called Malcolm Margin and James Rasmussen. And when they were looking at the preserved collection, particularly in a museum in Copenhagen, they found this particular individual. It was from a town called Dodola, near the Bali Mountains in Ethiopia. And it was collected by a guy who was then dead, Jorgen Burkett Smith. And neither Malcolm nor Jens were willing to stick their necks out because they thought it might be a hybrid. You know, you do get these big hybrids, these big viper hybrids. Most of the puff-adder, gaboon, rhino horns, rhinoceros, you bring them together, you can get them to breed, you can get offspring. They thought it might be an offspring between a oriocular, Ethiopian mountain viper, and a puff-adder. And in some ways it does look like it. I mean, that head looks puff-adder-esque to me. But about 4 years ago, I was sent a picture by a man called Evan Birchley. He's an American. He was driving in the Bali Mountains. And the Bali Mountains is a beautiful, beautiful national park down in southwest Ethiopia. There's a high plateau where you get the Ethiopian wolf. It's over 3,000 meters. And on the southern side there's a beautiful forest. You drop down this stuff that looks like out of the Lord of the Rings, giant heather forest, and you get coniferous, then broadleaf forest. This guy was driving down through the forest by the mountains and saw that on the road. He's an ornithologist, he just photographed it and sent me the picture. I said, I'd like to know what this is. I said, it's something new. But when we saw that, we realised that that thing couldn't be a hybrid. Here was a living animal. And subsequently, 2 or 3 more have been found. And in fact, myself and David Gower from the British Museum, and Tim Colson, and a couple of other guys, Ed Wade, a superb artist, we described this thing, called it Vitis Serena. Oh my God, I spelled the name wrong. With a capital. That's what I tell my students. You can tell a scientific idiot, and they write a scientific name, and they put the capitalise the specific name, and I've done it. I might go away thinking Steve Spawls is an idiot. But yeah, this was an exciting thing. Well, I think, these things are only known from the vicinity of this single road that descends the southern side of the Bali Mountains, going from the Soneti Plateau down through the Hereno forest. The forest is actually quite extensive. They're probably more widespread, but they're not that easy to find. I mean, my son went there for 2 months. He did pitfall trapping, drift fencing. He didn't find any. But a few more have been seen. I'm sure It will soon be in the pet trade. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I've rambled enough. Thank you very much for listening.